I'm Dr. Michelle Thompson, and I'm with the University of New Orleans in the Department of Planning and Urban Studies. And today I'm so happy to be able to have a conversation with Brian Baldwin, who's with the Environmental Systems Research Institute, or ESRI. It's out of Redlands, California, but Brian's in Massachusetts, and he's the lead software engineer with ESRI. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, how's it going, Michelle? Great to
Oh,
see you.
great to see you. Well, we have a history and a legacy together. And I just want, before we really go down the history road, I think it's important for students to know that you just never know where you're going to end up with what experience. And in 2008, I believe, when we met, you were instrumental in my first year at the University of New Orleans because I came as really a drop into the city to try to help with collecting data and doing maps and sharing that with the community because that was just the start after Hurricane Katrina
Yeah.
to kind of figure out how to get the city going again. So before we start, I just want to thank you again because as we sit here, January 19th, 2023, it is because of the work that we did together that really allowed me to really fulfill a lot of my goals and my dreams to provide data low and no cost to the community to help the community recover, prosper, and to really look forward to change. So I really want to thank you for that.
Oh, and Michelle, I look back at that time too as, I mean, I still use those stories all the time as, some of the most, impactful or powerful kind of things I've done in my career, I'd say. And, even then it was, if I look back then, it's just as this kind of grad student trying to figure out what, his place was in the city and the world. And yeah, it was a really impactful time. And it was, yeah, a really powerful experience.
Yeah, so let's go back to you got to tell us a little bit about yourself, of course. Like where are you from? And since I already kind of know where you're from, up in upstate New York, can you write us through that from upstate New York, your background, and how did you end up at the University of New Orleans?
Sure, sure. So I'll keep it as brief as I can. So I ended up going to Geneseo, so this state college up in New York in Rochester, for my 4 year. So I was up there and kind of had an interest in history, geography. So I ended up getting my bachelor's in history, and then ended up getting a degree in geography at the same time. And one of the courses I ended up taking that has now kind of basically led into a career was I took an intro GIS course, geographic information systems class. And at the time I hated it. And I always tell people that it was like, oh, this was the worst idea. And it was just painful and it wasn't fun. And I always said I do not want to be just stuck behind a computer for my whole life, doing work, which has not been the case. But so from there, I graduated, ended up going into the Peace Corps. So I was in China for 2 years. And then while I was in the Peace Corps, I think it was my first year, I remember seeing the headlines in the news. And so it was 2005, that September, obviously, when Katrina came through. And it just stuck in my head. And, when I was finishing up in the Peace Corps, it was kind of, what do I want to do next? What are the next things? I remember talking to a good friend of mine who had gone on to go and be an urban planner. New Orleans was still kind of just stuck in my head as this place that I, just wanted to kind of get to and experience. And so when I came back from China that fall, ended up kind of applying and looking for grad programs, and looked at Penn, Portland State, and then UNO. And UNO was the choice and where I wanted to be. And so that's what brought me down to the city, was really, wanting to see what it meant to be a planner. And, in the back pocket, I had a little bit of those kind of GIS skills and wasn't even really knew I would be pulling those out yet. But that was really what brought me down to the city and to the program.
And so just talking about this program again, so you were in the Masters in Urban and Regional Planning program. And
Yep.
so did you feel like you had it sounds like you had a number of skills, even though I understand hating GIS. But the idea is what when you started your program, did you feel like you had a particular track that you were interested in, or were you a generalist in terms of getting that planning education?
Yeah, great question. I think I was really a generalist. I mean, I came in and I would say I don't want to say still I don't have any idea what a planner does or what planning is, but I came into the program and really had no kind of idea what direction I wanted to go in or kind of career-wise what I wanted to do. I can remember really clearly having a conversation with someone at the program then who was one of my kind of mentors, and he said, "Oh, we'll help work on policy." And I, at that point, had no idea what policy even meant or what it was. It's like, okay, let's work on policy, I suppose. And then, I mean, I remember taking a transportation course and taking some of the statistics courses and really just kind of spreading myself across the program to get exposure to a number of different parts of the field. So in that first year was definitely just soaking up kind of what it even meant to be a planner, and then thinking of how to apply that to a job or a role. I really had no kind of idea what that would look like at that stage, and I think it was year two that started to finally crystallize a little bit of kind of seeing where planners were and what kind of positions you could have throughout the city.
Really is typical. I think that that is one of the issues that we have with a number of students who are coming into undergrad who may think, since I don't know what to do, I'm going to do general studies, which is absolutely fine. But I think we the planning field still has a problem with being able to explain what we do, because I say we kind of do everything. So that
Yeah.
sounds good. I mean, and obviously the idea of being able to look at transportation or policy, it helped you to have a better foundation. So then what happened in year two? What changed?
I mean, I would say the biggest thing, and I mean, not to dive right into advice for people, but the reason that I came to the city was to, you know, not to like take this kind of like Peace Corps mentality and feel like I made this huge change and difference, coming in as this outsider, but it was definitely wanting to come in and feel like to do something and to be involved. So I mean, I remember really clearly year two, starting to attend more of the planning meetings, going to the NORA offices, going to, just actually see people, go to community meetings and just figure out, what was happening on the ground and what did things look like. And so it was, really just starting to get my almost a pulse of what was happening in the city. And it was a really powerful way to start to feel what kind of areas I was really passionate about. And I mean, I remember, you kind of pulling me into some of the community planning meetings. And specifically at that time, there was the nonprofit Beacon of Hope, who we worked with a bit. And it was, through some of that work that it was, all right, let's stand with these community members and these residents, throughout the city. And what are the things that they need and what do they want? And so those were some of the most powerful experiences for me. It was almost that standing on kind of a street corner of, Mildenberg. And then, the next day we're down at kind of City Hall and you're kind of sitting in a planning meeting and just kind of really seeing the disparities between those two and, what were the gaps and how, information was getting from place to place. And that just really started to make it come alive. And at the time too, it might sound stupid, but I mean, I didn't have a car, or I think my wife and I shared a car. And so I was literally on my bike, just traversing the city everywhere. And I mean, that for me is still just this really it just made me feel like I was kind of part of that space. And I mean, I can remember, biking from mid city up to UNO for classes, going back south and through Gentilly. And I mean, I would just kind of trace my way throughout the city and really just started to know it in a more kind of like a deeper sense.
I really love all the things that you're saying. I want to pick up on a few of those because the UNO really does consider itself, I think it might even brand itself as the city's university. But most universities are literally either on a hill and kind of tucked away and separate from the community. And I
Yeah.
think that's what was interesting, not just then during your time, but even now, that we really want for our students to be part of. And the way to be part of is to take either through, volunteer project or being able to do service learning, but to get off campus and to live in the city. But during that time in 2007, as we reflect, it was just 2 years after Hurricane Katrina. And I still remember, and I'm sure you remember, there were, the street lights, many were still out,
Yeah.
certainly plenty of potholes. So, I'm sure you had to swerve around things with your bicycle quite a few times. But I think that what you're also saying is that being able to be part of the process, even as an observer,
Yeah.
would be a different kind of university experience than I think that many students may be having now. And we're going to talk a little bit about the pandemic in a bit and how that
Yeah.
might change things. But what I think I picked up on is you were taking an active interest, whether it was through your classes or your own. But I also want to mention that University of New Orleans still has a connection with the Peace Corps, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that was part of what the reaching out was, but I know that we've had a number of Peace Corps students come in. And I do believe that students with a Peace Corps background do have a little bit different philosophy about life, So I wasn't surprised that you really took the stance of I'm here to help and what can I do? So let's talk a little bit about Beacon of Hope. And you modestly say that you had just a bit of GIS, Geographic Information Systems, or mapping background. Um, did that experience change how you felt about GIS? And let's try to make the connection then between the study of GIS, the kind of activities you provide, and what you're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think my initial kind of, diving into GIS was very much, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's, basically doing kind of computer mapping. And at the most basic level, it's really a spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet of information with attributes, and then part of that spreadsheet is an XY coordinate. So, where is that thing located on the earth? And my beginning in GIS, I would say, was really on some of the fundamental, just can be a little bit mind numbing. It's what is a projection, and how do we manage data and organize information in data. And so it was hard for me initially to kind of connect a lot of those things to how you could use the tools and use the technology. And then so jumping forward from that little bit of time in my undergrad experience, to UNO, I found myself kind of in the program. I think maybe the one person with a little bit of experience kind of that had used GIS. And then when we started working with Beacon of Hope, it was really this kind of aha or light bulb moment, seeing, the struggle over data in the city at that time. And not to dive too deep into it, but the one major challenge at that time, I remember us like getting like secret files like sent to us on the sly, was we were trying to just understand what recovery looked like in the city and start to map and see where were neighborhoods recovering, and what was that rate of recovery, and start to promote that to other people outside of the city, to let them know that residents were coming back in certain neighborhoods, were starting to come to life again. But to even have the basic parcel information, which is that kind of outline of where buildings are, and what kind of that residential bound of a property is, that core data was not available.
That's
And
right.
was something you couldn't even get. And so like we were able to finally secretly get that, not say where we got it from, and then use that. And so for me, I mean, not to say it felt like this secret, like fun kind of spy thing, but I could feel kind of that almost power of how GIS and maps could be used to then for the public good. And so, one of the things we ended up doing then is going into those neighborhood groups, using Beacon of Hope as that entry point to then help residents understand how then they could collect data and they could start kind of managing the process on their own and kind of putting that into their hands. And that's stuck with me, all this time of just the power of doing that. And, the change that could start to have, at the boots on the ground level, resident by resident.
Well, again, I didn't know it then as much as I know now, that what we were doing was really a classic model in planning called public participation geographic information systems, or PPGIS. Truly, Brian, the work that you helped me do, we did together, was groundbreaking. And when I look back, I was even just Googling our names a few minutes before we got on here. And there was an announcement just a year after you had left, that we created the program, Who Data. David Lessinger had let
Mhm.
us borrow that name. But the template that was developed through our experience with Beacon of Hope, how do you work with a community organization to have them trust you? How do you set up mapping files, do in the field training, collect the data, clean it, map it, organize it, print it, give it back to the community so it can be used, and then making sure that it wasn't dirty data.
Yeah.
We put a lot of time and effort into that, and I remember many an hour, you know, probably as you were biking down, going, I'll get on the,
Yeah,
I'll
like
wait till they get
rolls
off
of
the
map
road.
tubes, I think I can remember having strapped to my bike, I'm
Oh my
sure. Yeah.
gosh. And yet that moment, like you said, you had an aha moment, and I just was like, this is it. It solidified for not just myself, but many others who then in the department volunteered for Who Data. Within 3 years of what you did as a training map, a training program, I think I had 10 students working on 20 projects around the city doing that work. And I think that that's what concerns me now
Yeah.
as we are going and still living with the pandemic. What's changed in terms of our ability to connect with community, to be able to connect to students, and to be able to get in the field and collect the data as we know it, since now we have AIs to do things and Google Street Views. Um, what, what any are your concerns about both the collection, management, and source of data, and then separately or together, the engagement with community that you experience? Could we, or are we losing some of that in this PPGIS world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, it's funny, and it's probably the same across the board in so many areas. I look back at what we did, and not to, go through the whole workflow, but it was, as you said, very labor and time intensive. I mean, we had, digital
Yes.
cameras that you would take a photo, jot on a clipboard the address that was, write down the number of the photo that you took, and, had a map printed out, none of this using a smartphone. And so it was all very manual. And then after all that data was collected, manually written down, you'd go back to a computer and then you'd start to type it in and enter it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The difference now is that, it's so easy to kind of collect information. I mean, within, I would say, an afternoon, I could walk around and capture, probably 90% more information than we were able to then, and just kind of just quickly digitizing that data, capturing photos, and instantly, back on a map, you could have that data just popping up and anybody could see it in real
Yes.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's both amazing and really powerful, but then it also, there's that challenge that can then kind of disempower or remove kind of that need for the input from the local community. So, there could be a project easily of 10 students to say, all right, let's go do a property survey of, the entire kind of northern part of the city of, Gentilly and Lakeview. And, you could spend a weekend, and students could capture all that data and not involve the local residents at all, because they don't need to, in a sense. And so I
Right.
think, it's that challenge of, what is the information being captured for, how can you kind of work more closely with the local residents and community and get yourself into those meetings, because they are still all meeting, and they're going from virtual back to in person. I'm sure a lot of them are in person again, and going to sit in those locations. And then the third player is obviously the city, and so they're doing a lot of their own data capture, their own data management, their own processes to try to get information to the public. And so how do you then interface with that with that organization to make sure you're not duplicating efforts as well, but you're all kind of trying to move things forward together.
Yeah, I again, a number of the projects that just come to mind in terms of what you're talking about is the summer of 2010, when I convinced a number of students in the middle of July in New Orleans
Beautiful, beautiful weather.
to go out, and they did a 100% survey of the lower ninth ward. I think I
Yeah.
shared that map with you. It was stunning, amazing, and heart-wrenching all at the same time to see
Yeah.
that 5 years later that we would explain all of those green spaces, while they looked like wonderful parks, were formerly where people lived.
Yeah.
And it was because of when we still were using clipboards, paper maps, and cameras to be able to put that together. One of the most exciting moments was when we were able to turn that database and map over to the city so they could start a mowing program. So I think those are some of the things that I think about when I think about the work that we did, and how excited we were to get that first, property condition map off the plotter.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And where we're at now.
Yeah.
So let's turn to where you're at now. Tell me about the work that you're doing. What excites you about the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
And
Great
how,
question.
again, does it connect to what I love, or maps?
So, after my time at UNO, I ended up, and we have to go into this, but, was looking for positions. A couple of jobs didn't come through. And then my wife ended up getting a position. So I moved on to Hawaii, of all places. And from there, ended up then finding a job back on the mainland, as they would say, and in GIS, and then started to kind of work my way more into the GIS field. And so about 9 years ago now, I started at Esri, which is kind of the world leader, the biggest company that makes, this kind of software. And they're based out of Southern California. And so at the time they kind of said, oh, do you want to move to Southern California? And I was like, sure. Like, why not? So we ended up there for 4 years. And my job when I started was similar to what I do right now. It's really kind of a technical generalist in a sense. It's, how can people use this technology? And like all technology, it keeps changing incredibly rapidly, and there's new advancements and new things coming. And so my role is really just letting people see how they can use this technology, in their different areas of their domains. And so my first role was one where I was not passionate about it, but I loved what I was doing. So I was helping utilities, so electric companies, gas companies, kind of map and manage their infrastructure, which was interesting. But it was, the whole time I was like, all right, I don't, this is interesting, but this is not, who I am and what I want to do. So about 3 years ago, a position opened up to join our higher education team. So now my role is really doing outreach to faculty, students, professors just across the globe, to do basically the same thing of just, how can they use maps? How can they use GIS? And what are some of the new things that are coming down the road that students should be aware of, that they should get kind of exposure to? So the job, I mean, I love it. It's a really fun, it's kind of getting to explore, see what's new, doing just a lot of conversations and talking to people, and really just trying to say, this is the kind of stuff that, and, if I could go back, and I try to do this all the time, say, all right,
Yes.
hey, undergrads, or hey, this, group of students, like, it's not like GIS is the only thing in the whole world, but if there's this, if you can just kind of get a little taste of it and have this little exposure to how you can kind of have this on your resume, or have this as kind of a skill set, it doesn't need to, you don't have to get a PhD in data science, but it's something you can use to get your foot in the door for an internship or for a job or for your next degree program. And it's something that's, it's not going to be the same for everybody. It's taken me a long ways, and I'm still at the company that makes the software, but I see a lot of people that it can, you can apply it and use it in so many different areas. And so I think it can be really powerful that people get exposed to.
So I didn't have to ask you about it. So that's exactly. But what's wonderful is I'm a believer. I've been a believer since, I started at Cornell when we had floppy disk and 386 33 computers, which I don't even know if people know what that is. But I have incorporated, as a result of our conversation, even it was last year, I believe, because I don't teach the GIS courses anymore.
Mhm.
Um, but I always want to have some kind of spatial element, whether it's spatial thinking or a tool. So this semester, all of my classes will be using um, either something from the US Census, it could be Census Business Builder, that ESRI also, it is the platinum standard. Gold, it's nice, but platinum's better. So, um, but to let students know that there are freely accessible tools that you don't, as you said, have to have a PhD in data science to use. So
Yeah.
that mantra of your boss, GIS for everyone, right, or mapping for everyone, or something like that, is really come true. The other piece I am using for two of my classes is Story Map.
Awesome.
And just yesterday, I put your name in the link for Claiborne Corridor in the syllabi, because it's exciting for folks to understand it, to be able to open up and look at the story map that you were able to update, and we were able to get one of the students to add some more pictures in, which was
Yeah,
great
which was awesome.
experience. Is that this is their community. So you could say, I can do this. And not only that, I can see it. And so for these classes, which one is just a survey of its introduction to neighborhood planning, the other one is
Yeah.
New Orleans region, you don't necessarily have to have a map. You can get one, but you don't have to make one. So I think
Mhm.
that's what's exciting about what you've said, is that if students can take away something from, I'm hoping, this conversation, is that you you want to add value to your resume. You
Yeah.
want to also add value to your experience at UNO. And I think you did that and have done that successfully, Brian.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
go ahead, please. I'd
no,
like your
I was
final
going to
thought.
say, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the piece for me that I try to show and tell students is just, um, no matter what tool you use, and just, you have unlimited kind of licensing there from the Esri tools. And so there's all this, capability that you have. And, if it's using that or if it's using other things, just kind of follow that area that maybe if you're passionate about bike infrastructure, or if it's passionate about, climate change and those impacts on the city, any of those topics or areas, or if it's housing or, I mean, you can start to use some of these tools, and very quickly, if it's, even in a week, you can make some really powerful, things. If it's a basic visualization, or if it's starting to do some simple analysis. And, as I tell, I probably overstate it, but I always say, you could make an application. I mean, similar to the kind of the Claiborne story map. I mean, something like that. If you pass that to, a hiring manager, or if you pass that to somebody that you're looking to get an internship for, I'm not going to say you're going to be hired on the spot, but you will show, instantly that you can add value to, them trying to communicate their mission, their purpose, whatever they're trying to do, you can
Mhm.
kind of add value and help them. So, um,
Absolutely. I'm in total agreement. So to close out our session, one of the things that's been fun is watching you on social media and having a lot of fun in your job. And so I just want you to close out with a little something on your banjo for us, since it's right,
oh
within
God.
I don't know if you have an ERSI song or you want to
What do we
play a
got?
little
I don't
something.
know. I don't even know if this is tuned, Michelle. It's like
Oh,
right now,
just
this is really it.
sure we can come up with it. You know, I don't. You know, I can't sing, but I can give you a. I don't know. All right. So you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna have to do another one when you're tuned. Fine. You're already fine tuned, Brian. But let me just say that we'll get your banjo in tune. I'm sure that when the students get a chance to see this, they'll say, "Yeah, you're right. You can't sing." But what I can do, I can still make a mean map. I can, and I still truly, truly find that the experience that I had literally from, when I came down the very first time in 2007 with a GIS team from Cornell, not being able to have, there was no street signs in the lower ninth ward,
Yeah.
could not get that parcel map. I remember that it was even 4 years prior when I was in Boston at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative saying the same thing. What you have said throughout this conversation is for the community. And if we can democratize data, if we can provide resources, I think we've done well. And so the mantra now is, doing well and doing good. Well, I'm glad to see you're doing both. So I just want to thank you again, Brian, for your time.
Yeah, this was fantastic, Michelle. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the conversation.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Bye-bye.